Imagine if you could know what your therapist is like before you even sit in their chair. By listening to the show, you can get to know how your therapist thinks, get a sense of their tone, and hear the kind of advice they give to their clients. Welcome to Beyond the Session, the show where you get a free VIP pass into a room of therapists. This is good. I asked ChatGPT to come up with a catchy tagline for us, and it said, "Step into the therapy room after hours and hear the uncensored thoughts therapists dare not share." So I don't know what that means, but it's not happening here. We made this podcast for a few reasons. Number one, it's a way to give back in a time when people are tight for cash and facing really tough mental health challenges. Secondly, we want our clients to have the best therapy experience possible, and we want to foster a really great therapeutic relationship with them. The show is brought to you by Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. Our old name is Lindsay, Tsang and Associates, and we've been at the corner of SN and since 2016. We're a team of therapists whose passion is to see people who are stuck break free and come truly alive. Today, we're talking about stories of triumph and growth in therapy. So today I've got Andi Atkins, who's a registered psychotherapist, and Lindsay Tsang, who is also a registered psychotherapist. Guys, as RPs, your professional college does not allow you to promise results in therapy because it's really not a guarantee. And it's kind of preying on people who are feeling vulnerable, right? But we still kind of use soft language in our advertising, such as, "We're here to help you move forward." And I want to know, is it a given in therapy that people will experience breakthrough and move forward? And do all of your clients eventually graduate?
That's a really great question, because the reality is that therapy really doesn't work for everybody. I mean, if you look at anything that has to do with evidence, so when we do big studies on whether therapy is helpful for people or not, what the evidence shows is that talk therapy does work. There is a statistical and significant difference when people come in versus when they come out. So likely it could help, but there could be people on the spectrum from it really, really helped them to the spectrum. It just didn't work for them at all. So that's why in the end, it still does come back to the individual. I think there's a couple of different prerequisites maybe for therapy to be helpful. One of them is that you really have to kind of like your therapist and trust them. If you don't have that, it's just, that's the actual biggest predictor of whether therapy would work for someone or not. So if you don't have that, it just doesn't work. And that's why I tell people all the time, if you don't like me, this won't work. So it's not offensive to me if you need to switch to a different therapist. But then there's also the other part. I mean, people have to have awareness that they want to change. They need to have motivation to want to change. They need to also have the ability to make changes and to put effort into their own change for therapy to work. So no, it's not a guarantee, and there are a lot of different little pieces that when you put together is when the magic happens.
For sure, statistically, the odds are in your favor that therapy will be helpful, but it is not helpful for everybody. And as Lindsay correctly identified, the therapeutic relationship is really that main underlying factor that is going to kind of give the foundation to build on. I think it's also important to think about what constitutes success in psychotherapy, or what triumph or success looks like, because that is going to look different to every single person who walks in the door. And it's going to be based on our own values, our own strengths, our own life experience. So as therapists, we definitely are very conscientious about not projecting our own goals or values on people, right? It's working with the client to see what is truly important to them. And like I said, that can look different for different people. There's not just one standard of success, I would say.
Yeah. And how do you approach celebrating milestones with your clients and, recognizing that they are having success, even though it might not look like what you want it to look like as a therapist, or what you might measure success by maybe, while still acknowledging that their mental health journey might be long, it might be challenging, and it might not come out the way that they're hoping or expecting. Do you ever have clients who are wondering if they're getting better, or saying to you, "I'm really frustrated about where I'm at. This isn't where I wanted to be"? How do you kind of coach them or cheer them through that?
I'm not quite sure. I think that a lot of the times it happens pretty organically, right? Like people come in and we're just having discussion. I mean, there's a follow-up, right? A lot of times when someone comes in, I say, "Hey, how's things been?" And they would tell me the celebrations or the wins. And that's part of the recognition of it. I mean, sometimes, and not always, because not everything can be put into numbers, but I think that's helpful too. because, you can ask someone like, hey, if you rate your relationship with your spouse from a scale of 1 to 10, where is it? And they start off telling me as a 2, but then later they tell me as an 8. Then that's a very clear celebration there, but they know that at this point. It's like a pretty clear. They know that they are happy with the results.
Okay, but say you have a client coming in and you do a GAD-7 with them or something, and they had a score of 4 before and now it's down to 2. So how do you kind of encourage them and celebrate other successes with them? Would you use things like gratitude or finding things in life that are going well, talking about other areas of life where there are strengths or where they have support, at least, even if they don't feel like it's really strong right now?
So, Kathleen, it sounds like what you're talking about is related to positive psychology, which is at least somewhat predicated on the idea that, removing the negatives, so to speak, like, the anxiety, the depression, whatever else is going on, is not enough on its own to guarantee sort of a happy or meaningful life. You have to add back in the positives as well. So, I mean, that would definitely be part of it. When I sit down with a client, we look at what would you like less of in your life? What would you like more of? What does your day look like right now? And if you were feeling better, or if you did reach your goal, what would your day look like? Like, starting from the moment you open your eyes, what is different? And sometimes that can be a little bit of a roadmap for people. Speaking to the strength piece, that's something that I, as a therapist, incorporate right from the get-go. I'm genuinely just so interested in people, and it is not, not just their struggles and their challenges, but also their passions and their hopes and their values and their strengths. And I definitely try to build that into the process and find ways to draw on, like you said, the support network that they have, maybe reigniting some interest for hobbies. That's a really big thing that tends to fall by the wayside when people are struggling. And then definitely things like cultivating gratitude and appreciation, taking those moments of sort of savoring, the taste of your coffee in the morning or something like that. But I think, again, as a therapist, trying to find that balance, I don't want to be that person that's like, oh, look on the bright side, every cloud is silver lining. Because I think a lot of people, when they come into therapy, do not want to hear that, rightly so. So I think it's trying to have a balanced view of, I guess, both sides.
I want to piggyback off of that, because I think if you look at even a CBT model, that's basically what we're doing, is saying, hey, what's the evidence for the negative? And also, what's the evidence for the positive? So we are not trying to downplay the negative because it is hard, right? So we want to validate that, along with recognizing that there are wins along the way. I mean, one of the arguments I have is that actually optimism is a choice, because optimism and pessimism are actually not based on reality. They're based on a projection into the future. And so you might as well use the one that's more helpful for you, because statistically, people who are optimistic are doing better in many ways. But really, the only difference between someone who's optimistic, though, and pessimistic is that the optimistic person would look at their negative events and recognize them to be localized and temporary. But a person who's pessimistic would instead think of it as a really pervasive and permanent thing. So again, we're not trying to say that the negative beliefs aren't there, but we're just trying to make sure that you're flexible enough in how you think about it, is that they are not completely pervasive. And so then we can also celebrate the positive sides, which you already believe. So we're not trying to induce new beliefs about the positive sides, but we're just trying to recognize what's already there, and then to kind of make that a little bit more permanent or bigger in your mind. So when you do that, that's just a way of making yourself more flexible in how you think, and in that way celebrate the wins.
I'm kind of looking for some stories, I guess, of unexpected transformations that your clients have experienced, where maybe they had one therapeutic goal and then it turned out that something completely different was the key to them having a breakthrough. Can you think of any times where that's happened?
I'm not sure if this is the kind of story you were looking for, but it is the first thing that came to mind. And it is a story of, therapeutic success or breakthrough. I think there's a tendency sometimes for people when they come in and they've been having a tough time, with their mood or with their anxiety or with certain behaviors. And sometimes there's a tendency to over pathologize these things and to maybe not recognize that these might be perfectly healthy or appropriate normal responses to a difficult situation. And of course, we don't have control over most things in our lives, but there are certain things, whether it's, maybe it's a relationship somebody is involved in, or a job that they are at, or some other circumstance where they do have some autonomy. And sometimes these emotions or even these mental health concerns are our brain and our body's way of saying, hey, something is not working here. So somebody might come in thinking, okay, I need coping skills to deal with this. And of course, I mean, that's always going to be part of our work together. But it might not be the issue is, oh, you have anxiety. It might be, oh, you're anxious because you're not in the right relationship right now. And then, not that it's always easy to end that, but sometimes once you have had that realization, I've literally seen the anxiety lift off somebody like a cloud. So yeah, I don't think that's what they were expecting. I mean, they were hoping for the anxiety to be gone, but probably not in the way that it happened. Sometimes emotions are a really important source of information, and we want to listen to them as well. We don't just want to try to quell them.
Right, because sometimes we see those emotions as a symptom. If we compare it to our physical health, sometimes we feel our lymph nodes puffing up or we're starting to sneeze, and that in itself is not the symptom so much as there may be another thing going on that is causing that to happen, and our body is like trying to react to it, right, and trying to heal somehow. And sometimes we need another perspective to help us sort things out and realize it's not just about I need nose spray to stop sneezing. Maybe I have an allergy going on, right? And there's something that I'm constantly being exposed to that is actually giving me the sneeze, and it's recurring. So the sneeze is not the problem. There's the allergy that's behind it, right? So that's a really good example, I think, Andi. Lindsay, can you think of any unexpected transformations?
Yeah, right now I'm having two kind of examples in my mind. One of them was for a particular client because that was a surprise for me. I had a client who came in with severe anxiety, depression, and it was very visible. And so I think what was neat with our journey was, and I think this is helpful for the audience because it shows how different it is for people. Some people come in for a session and they're good. But this was a particular client who held 20 years worth of trauma that was undealt with and not talked about, was given medication, but had zero talk therapy about it. It took a long time to coax those stories out and to learn the safety of the therapeutic, like the environment, the office, the relationship that we had to build, the small banters we had to do with each other and become kind of like professional friends a little bit first. But it was like watching a real transformation, visible transformation in a person. So I think that was an exceptional story because we can't expect these kind of transformations all the time. But it was really, really cool for me as a professional to see that the work I do does that kind of impact on someone, from, bedridden to going out and volunteering, right? The way they look, with no more shaking, all that kind of stuff. So that was a really, really huge transformation. I think the other example that comes to my mind is more generic and is more to do with my couples therapy practice. Couples therapy is very difficult because you have two people coming in, usually strong-headed, and that's why they're fighting in the first place with each other. And sometimes they want to wrap me into that fight. And for me, it is very gratifying when I have two people come in, they show a lot of desire to transform and to do well for each other. And they're recognizing that they need to do something or that they need some help, and that's why they're here. And so when that happens and they take to heart some of the tools or the practices that we do in session and bring it home as well, you see these very, very visible turnaround that you can feel it in the air, right? They come in the first time and it's like tension. And then later on, a few sessions down, you go and you hear them laughing and talking to each other in the waiting room, and they come in and there's jokes and there's banters and there's clear movement, and they say things like, things are going really well. And it probably began when we started doing that thing you told us, even though it seemed silly to us in that moment. But now that I'm doing it, now that we've been doing it, it actually changed the quality of our relationship. So those are always really not just for their sakes gratifying for me, because I just think about how they have children and their children are going to see this really different parenting because of the parents being good. That for me has generational impact, and that's why it's really exciting to be a part of that.
Yeah, and I want to know how you navigate the balance between providing support as a therapist and kind of inputting your lens, right? And also fostering independence in your client's therapeutic journey. How do you kind of incorporate your client's strengths and their working style and their resources into the therapy process so that they can grow and move forward?
Yeah, this is funny because when you go through therapy training, it's almost kind of a purist approach where it's like it's all about the client's journey. It's client-centered, which I do agree with. I'm not against that idea. And I think for some clients that would work really well. They come in and they're like, I have this problem, and you can dig it out of them. It's like, well, what are you really looking for? And what do you think needs to happen? And they have all the answers and they know what to do and they know how to direct the counseling. So in that case, then yes, that's the purest approach of like, I'm really just a sounding board. I'm just there to bounce back exactly what you're helping you process your thoughts and decisions. But I think that in reality, that just doesn't happen. There are many times when people need a framework. They don't have the language for it. They don't even know where to begin. And so that's why we are trained professionals. That's why we take all of these extra workshops and learn all about mental health, is so that we have the language in the definitions to help people think through things. That's where our role is, to be sitting back and observing how the interaction is happening in session, and then being wise about it. When do I have to go in and say something, and when do I don't say something? When do I divulge something about my personal life and build trust with you, and when do I don't do that? So it's not clear cut. There's no rules about this. And I think that's the reason why experienced therapists do get better, because they are getting wiser on how and when to say something or when not to say something.
And I think that making those clinical decisions and judgments, a lot of it, again, comes back to the therapeutic relationship, right? Somebody walks in, you're not going to just, lay a bunch of harsh truths. You're going to develop that relationship over time. And you kind of get a sense from people how they respond best, right? Some people do respond better to a little bit of a gentler, more traditionally supportive approach. Some people really want, blunt honesty. They just want you to tell it like it is. And some people are able to tell you that right off, right, of what they're looking for. I was also looking at some research that suggests that therapists are not always the best at sort of guessing what their clients are going to find the most helpful or what they have found most helpful. So I always think it's interesting when I'm, wrapping up the client and maybe we're looking back over some of our progress together. And then they say, oh, there was one thing you said that changed my life. That's actually been said a few times. And it's pretty rare that I actually knew what it was. Sometimes it's like a throwaway comment, or it was just part of the banter, like Lindsay was saying. There's been a couple times where I'm like, oh, it was definitely the time we had, this epiphany, but it's kind of rare. So it's not an exact science, but like Lindsay was saying, as you develop that therapeutic relationship and also as you grow as a therapist, you sort of have more data to draw on to make those inferences.
I've heard from clients before too. Sometimes they'll go to another therapist who only tells them what they want to hear, or says to them, what do you think you should do? And they're like, if I knew what I should do, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be paying for this, right? Maybe the answer's in there somewhere, but I haven't found it yet. So like, I need some guidance here on how to find what the answer is, what the path is forward, because I'm feeling very stuck. That's why I'm here, right? I think it's important to have shared contribution into a client's journey, right? You're giving some guidance, you're pushing back a little bit, you're asking questions to kind of help the client frame themselves. But I mean, they know their stories best at the end of the day, and is able to speak to their experience and know what's really going to be the best step forward for them. I guess you're just providing them options and guidance and food for thought so that they can make a choice, right? And actually act on that themselves. Can you share an example of a client who initially resisted therapy, but eventually embraced it and experienced really meaningful growth?
So when you talk about being resistant to therapy, a couple things come to mind. So one is that, there's an informed consent process in therapy. So we are never doing therapy with somebody who is not fully and freely consented to be there. People don't get dragged kicking and screaming in. But of course, there are a lot of people who are, maybe willing to come in, give it a try, but, there still is a bit of that internal resistance or doubt, which is totally valid. I think the example that comes to mind for me is I work with a lot of teenagers, and with teenagers, they're in a little bit of a gray area. I mean, they are an age where they can consent themselves, and I will never force a teenager to have a session with me because therapy is not something that can be done to you. It is a collaborative process. But often I will encourage a teen who has maybe been brought in by a concerned parent, like, okay, are you okay to just give one session a try, just see how it goes? Most of the time they're willing to do that, or maybe they've been bribed or something like that. That's not really my purview, but I do find I've had quite a few of these teens who came in and seemed, don't really want to be here. And then by the end of that first hour, like sometimes you really click with the person, you vibe, and they have a sense of, oh wow, like this is really cool. Like I actually want to do therapy. I'm excited to talk to you. I've had those words, said to me. So I think that's an example for me of where somebody is like pretty hesitant coming in, and then they realize, you know what? No, I want to give this a shot.
Totally. I think that, a lot of times teenagers, for sure, they're like, what's this all about? Not only teenagers, right? It's to think of a different example. Something I get is older guys. So it's usually they're at the end of their rope. So they're like, I got to try something. Maybe they're coming in for couples therapy. It's their last ditch effort to not lose their wives, but they don't really believe in the process. And to be honest, a lot of times those don't go very well. And I even tell them that. I'll say, if you don't trust me or the process, it's not super likely this will help you. So that's something you need to figure out, right? So that's another way of just, it's that screening piece of like, I don't need to spend a lot of time with you if you don't like me or you don't like this process. The question I get once in a while too is, oh, how old are you? And I would say, listen, well, I wouldn't actually say that, but listen, I'm Asian. You think I'm 18. I am actually 38. And it usually surprises them when they hear my age anyways. So I would have people asking that question, and it's very legit, obviously. They're saying, you haven't lived through what I lived through. How can you help me? And my response would be, you're right. I haven't lived through what you've lived through. And that's the case for most of my clients. But that doesn't mean I can't be there to give you ideas or to bounce ideas or to help you think or to give you frameworks or to bring you science. So those are the things that I bring in. And I know we're beating this because you'll always hear this, and it's just the truth. You build the trust, you build the friendship, and then they see that the tools work, and that's when they start trusting the process.
Before we go today, I want to bring it home a little bit. What lessons have you learned from your clients' journeys that have had a profound impact on your own approach to therapy and personal growth? Do you ever just hear things from your clients that you're like, hey, that's something that I can take home and use, or that's something I want to borrow and, bring into other sessions for maybe another client that you have in mind that's going through something similar right now. And in some way, they're kind of helping you put together the puzzle pieces.
I have to say that one of the huge privileges of my job is having the opportunity to meet and speak, on a pretty personal level with so many different people. And I mean, my clients are just such amazing people, and so many of them don't see themselves that way, at least when we start out working together. And it does happen all the time where my clients will share things, I mean, not even necessarily related to mental health, but just their observations about the world in general that are just so interesting. There's definitely been a few times that people have given specific techniques that either they have come up with, or a really interesting one. Like I said, I work with teenagers a lot on social media. For sure, one of the good things that has come out of it is more awareness around mental health and well-being. And so a lot of my teenagers will come in and say, oh, hey, I saw this thing on TikTok or on Snapchat, or that one of my friends learned, from their therapist. And it kind of gives me some information about, I guess, what is going on out there. But sometimes it's very useful techniques as well.
Right. And I think the part where you have teens coming to you, they're kind of at the cutting edge of what's going on in mental health. And if you're able to find something that is on TikTok or on social media that, their friends are into, then it's a way of kind of staying relevant with their age group and with their peers, right? So I think that's really powerful that, you're able to hear those things and glean from it in your own approach to therapy.
Yeah, I think it's hard to think of specific examples because it's always so fluid or organic, at least how my mind works, right? I'm not really the kind of guy to write down these things and then create schemas on it. It's all kind of like internalized, and it just somehow finds its way out sometimes in other contexts. And that just kind of stuck out at the moment is like someone told me that another therapist told them this, and I was like, oh, that's good, I'll steal that. He's just like, oh yeah, she told me that emotions, you got to do the 3 L's. You got to listen to it, you got to learn from it, and then you have to let it go. And I was like, oh, that's pretty in line with how I see it, but the 3 L's help. So just like little things like that, sometimes you just pick up from your clients. And as you're talking about cutting edge and teenagers, like it just kind of reminded me too that one of the neat things about being a therapist is that you kind of have a pulse on what people are thinking about in general. So like we've gone through this life-changing historic event of the pandemic, and so we were on the grounds listening to what people were struggling through with that all the way through it and still now. So in some ways we can see the trends or the anger or the fear of what's going on, responding to world events around us. And so it makes us consider what our stances are and what we think or what we feel, or maybe we need to be flexible too in seeing the two sides of it and how people come and approach it. And as we're helping people to think about these fears, we're actually in some ways doing that for ourselves too. And so that's where we get a lot of value as well by doing the job that we do.
Yeah, that's awesome. We're hoping that the clients are getting better, but in some way, if you're getting better too as a therapist, then that's just going to benefit all of your clients more, right? Andi and Lindsay, thanks so much for coming in today and talking to us about stories of triumph and growth. This is Beyond the Session. We're brought to you by Reset Counseling and Psychotherapy in Barrie. If you want to get in touch with us, if you have any questions that you'd like asked on the air, you can email us at resetbarrie@gmail.com, and we'll catch you next time.